When I was shooting the video for the trackage rights for the EL on the last operating video, couldn't help but notice the bright white joint compound showing on this particular section of track. And while a little further down into the Du Bois area, I've got a grade crossing I'm trying to figure out how I want to install. So I don't want to do any work on ballasting there because that just makes the grade crossing more challenging. But on the Duckunder area, which is only a little more than 8 inches wide, there's really no reason why I can't move ahead with the scenery. So what I've done so far is come in and replace all the missing ties at the splice points. So now that that's done, I can get to work on doing ballast and scenery, and we'll see how that goes. While the glue is still drying, next step is getting the ballast in, so that is one step closer. And I typically use carpenter's glue to do the edge of the cork, just to get that to set up first before I do all the rest of the ballasting. This is a little bit unique situation because there's more of a slope here. Hard to see it, I guess. Try and get you a better angle. That's better. More of a slope here than is typical, so it took me a couple series of attempts to get the ballast to sit and not run too far down the hill, although a little of it running down the hill is probably accurate. So the next step will be to add in some vegetation. And one of the things I did, and I'm glad I did it, I wish I would have thought ahead and made the backdrop come down a little further. I've got two pieces, unfortunately, that you can see a line there. I'll have to hide with vegetation. But I actually came back down on the back side of the track, and I think that will really help the illusion of distance for such a narrow 8.5 inch wide shelf. Again, this is the Duckunder portion of the railroad, so very narrow, and doing that additional topographic work there I think will help create that illusion a little bit better. So next step is actually one of my favorite steps, which is adding the shrubs and bushes and undergrowth. Not sure how many trees I'll put on this. Kind of in a dangerous spot for trees along the edge here for elbows, although it's actually higher than elbows, so maybe it's okay. And also not a lot of switching going to take place right on this section of fill, so I always try and determine where you're going to be uncoupling cars, because reaching in over trees is not ideal for a bunch of reasons. I also run trains on the railroad before I ballast to make sure everything operates okay. That's the second piece of it, is just seeing how you actually do the switching maneuvers to see where you've got, where you need to be able to reach and where you can have obstructions without too much issue. So more to follow. Before I did the vegetation, I remembered I wanted to paint the rails first, so I did that. As I talked about previously, I think I'm going to continue painting the rails after ballast. The overspray actually into the ballast I thought would be a detriment originally, because I kind of did it by mistake, but I really like how it turns out. The other nice thing about painting after you ballast is no matter how hard you try, at least how hard I try, I always end up getting some of the ballast stuck to the sides of the rails and the tops of the ties. The tops of the ties wasn't a problem, because you could always pick that off after, if you painted first and then ballasted, you could always pick those off the top of the ties without much problem. But if you pick the pieces of ballast off the sides of the rail, generally ended up pulling some of the paint off. So the nice thing about ballasting first and then painting, I was able to go in and clean up all the ballast off the rails and ties and then paint. So not how I used to do it, and like I said, by mistake kind of wound up doing it that way. So here's that segment. Next step will be to put some shrubs and vegetation and finish up the scenery. Okay, before we get started with the next layer of scenery, just a recap that in order to make up for what I think is a lack of vegetation in a lot of the commercially available materials, I've been using coconut coir, and this is just a basket liner from a big box store. And I used to try and make like a small batch of shrubs, or a shrub or a group of shrubs all at a time. And a long time ago I mentioned that I had shifted that. So what I've been doing is just taking a really large segment of this, and I kind of pull it apart so I get a texture and a height that I like, and then I cover it with just dark gray primer and sprinkle fine turf over it. I think I've got one regular green there and then maybe a light green or something here, so 2 different greens, and then I'll pull this apart. I'll pull this material apart to make actual pieces that I fit onto the railroad. The other thing I do is when I make Scenic Express super trees, sometimes little pieces break off or you prune them to get them to fit, so I save all those. So these are excellent understory trees or saplings or other things, just brush or undergrowth that really easy to use since you've already got them here. So you just using the foam scenery, I just use a little bit of white glue on each one and press it right into the foam. The other thing I'll be using is bushes, and this is the forest blend. This particular color, these bushes, are almost exactly the same color green as the acrylics when you use the Mars Black and medium yellow in the fashion that Chris Lyon recommends in his backdrop painting. So these are excellent, at least I find, in putting right at the base of the backdrop, and if you do them in little groups, it really helps to hide the joint between the backdrop and the scenery. So, alright, we'll get started and see how it goes. Not sure if it comes out real well, but the back side of the tracks are done. Combination of the bushes, the coconut coir, underbrush, and then the little bits of Scenic Express super trees to put some saplings in there. And most of the purpose here was to hide the seam in my backdrop, which I didn't think ahead as much as I wish I would have. There's a section where you can really see the seam, but there's kind of a meadow on the backdrop there, so I'm not sure if I can put too much more to obstruct it, but it really did, at least I think, make it look less obvious. And of course when there's a train running in front of it, you probably won't be looking at that at all. So at least for now, I think I'm going to move to the front, work on this bank in the front. And the only place that I do any uncoupling occasionally is right about here at the end when I'm working some of the industries in Du Bois. So I'll just have to make sure that I leave some space for that and to reach this switch stand. So we'll keep going. So I finished up the other side using the same materials that I discussed. The only thing I changed, or added rather, is did a little bit more static grass. I need to blend that in a little bit more there. But the other locations, a little bit of static grass, just to kind of make a transition from the fine turf. And I did some real tall 12 millimeter static grass, just to kind of show where they sprayed some brush that was starting to get pretty close. So I'll probably still add some details like some ties and some other junk that might get thrown down the bank, but that's how it came out. Get some pretty good depth, even least a perception of depth on an 8.5 inch shelf. And all of the larger stuff is simply just throwaway parts from broken trees. So in this particular case, I didn't make any trees. This is just all scrub and brush that the railroad's been fighting for decades to keep away from their right-of-way. And pretty good use of leftover stuff. I do, however, need to make another batch of trees, so I guess that'll be coming up shortly. Alright, that's it for now. More to follow.